Welcome to the SoulBodyHorse Podcast, where we dive deep into the horse-human connection. Here we believe in the power of stories and digging deeper, pushing further, and asking the oft-unsaid question. I'm your host, Meredith Crawford. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you the story of Gomez, the horse behind SoulBodyHorse. I found Gomez at a barn outside of Spain in early March 2019. And the day I went to try him, it was raining, it was windy. I had just come from the airport, was super jet-lagged, and could barely get my left boot on. In fact, my boot was so tight that I lost all circulation from my knee downwards while I rode him. What I noticed about him was that he was super responsive to my seat and my intent. And even though I didn't have use of my left leg, he did everything I asked as though I had my left leg, except for the flying change from right to left. That was the only thing I didn't get with him. But he was 6, coming 7 at the time. I vetted him, and 3 vets looked at his x-rays, both in Spain and the US, super squeaky clean, especially the x-rays, and the rest of the vetting, of course, was also clean. So bought him, and of course, as you do, because he's Lusitano, I castrated him. That was May 2019. And while I was waiting for his wound to heal, so he could come home to California with me, I received the news that he had developed pulses in his feet 10 days after the castration. I happened to be in Europe at the time, and so went out to see him about 12 to 14 days after that castration. And at that point, I walked into the barn, and the vet looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, he's developed laminitis and his rotation's at 3 degrees. And I looked at the horse, and I knew exactly what that horse was feeling and thinking, and that he just wanted to die. At that point, again, keep in mind, this is 3-degree rotation. I looked at the horse and just silently told him, "You pull through this and you'll have a good life with me in the States." And so thus our journey together began. He went off to the first vet where he could be monitored 24/7, standing on little bags of ice. He was in solitary confinement there, didn't do well. Rotation kept going, and within 3 weeks, the vets there told me to put him down, and he had 9% rotation at that time. And my vet in the US was like, "Don't do it over 9%. So off I went back to Spain, and the seller of the horse graciously offered to take him back because I didn't know what to do. So the seller of the horse, we brought the horse back to the farm where I purchased him from, and I started working with a different team of vets. And throughout the summer of 2019, I flew to Spain every 3 to 4 weeks as the disease kept unfolding. We did everything that was known or possible or really within the Spanish vet's repertoire. We cut the tops of his toes off. We put him on ice. Finally, his rotation had progressed to the point where they started talking about cutting the deep digital flexors. Now, the deep digital flexor tendon is the tendon that runs down the back of the leg, and the insertion point is P3. So to stop the rotation and be able to allow P3 to return back to normal, if the deep digital flexor is chronically contracted, it needs to be cut because it can't relax in the foot. The bone in the foot can't return to normal. So early to mid-September 2019, we figured we had about 24 hours, maybe 48 max, for the horse to live before P3 went straight through the bottom of the foot. At that point, his left foot had already become infected because the sole of it was so thin that dirt was and bacteria was getting up into it. I made the decision to cut the deep digital flexors. And the surprising part about this and him reaching this stage is that at this point in time, I had already been on the phone with insurance. Shout out to American Bankers Group for working with me through the situation. They were fantastic. But I had already been on the phone with them several times over the past few months saying, the horse is down, won't get up, or the horse won't eat, or, things are looking really bad. We'll probably lose it within 48 hours. And every time I was on the phone with insurance and told them this, the next morning I'd go out and he would always show signs of improvement. And throughout this progression of the disease, there was a pretty standard pattern to his rotation where he would rotate and things would kind of be touch and go for a few days. And then he would stabilize for a week or two. And at that point, we'd back him off the drugs or make a few little changes because he showed the signs of improvement and stabilization. And then he would rotate again. So for anyone out there who's dealt with laminitis, it really is a roller coaster of a disease. So he was living at the vet's in September 19 when we cut the deep digital flexors. And then from then it was a matter of rehab and getting him sound enough to make the flight back to California. And from that point, it was clear that he was going to live. It was clear throughout this time that other than the initial meeting, when I looked at him and knew he wanted to die, that first month was difficult. But it was clear after that he had a fighting spirit and that he really did want to live. And so I really threw out the rule book of what the vet schools say to do. And the thing that I would tell the vets and told a seller is that when this horse is done, we're done. But as long as this horse wants to live, then I'll continue to do whatever I can to support him in that decision. So early on, it became a matter of letting the horse decide his own outcome with this disease and giving him the choice to do that. Sure, there were some scoffers, and I heard from a lot of vets just to straight up put him down. But every time I heard that, I'd go out to the barn and look at him and say, do you want to, is today the day, or are you ready to go? And the answer was always no. So onward we marched. And then unwrapping experience in this healing process, it's brought up a lot of questions for me about the agency of horses, their level of consciousness, their life purposes, fate, destiny versus choice. And as we went down the healing process, it was the questions of acting in the highest good or the greatest good, but for whom? Is it really for the animal? Is it for me? Is it for money or for whatever measure of success or achievement that I wanted to have with this horse? And then also, what is the highest or best self of something versus textbook perfect? Right now, after I record this webinar, I'll go out to the barn and I'll see him, and he has pretty much a normal life. Some days he's up for being ridden or worked. Other days he's not. I've given him that choice. In healing, is it in the best good for everything to become textbook perfect, which really, as you unpack what perfect is a collection or an agreement of ideals? Or is it that he gets to be his self and fulfill whatever his purpose is in coming into this world? Along the same lines, is there something happening to, or is it happening for? When things started to go unexpected, and not only did he show up with laminitis, but having a horse with both front tendons cut wasn't ever something I pictured having. It's easy to say that's, these things are happening to me instead of saying these things are happening for me. And this experience absolutely has changed the direction of my life. It started this podcast. It started my business, The Lab Horse. It's been one of the greatest blessings of disguise that I could have ever wanted or hoped for, that I never had pictured or imagined. And as we've gone through the healing, it's happened in layers. First, we started off with Western medicine, the x-rays, the surgery, the painkillers. All the triage work was so important in helping him at the start of the disease and at the initial part of the rehab. And then it became red light therapy and laser. They're similar but different. The ice compression with game ready and other forms of cold therapy. And then Eastern medicine going into acupuncture, into herbs, into diet, then back on track and ceramic particles and sort of material therapy. And then energy, that progressed in energy therapies such as Reiki, shamanic work, essential oils, crystals, flower essences, rain beads, tetrabiokinetic, cranial sacral therapy, osteopathy, also using balance pads similar to Surefoot, structural integration, trigger point therapy, Western herbs and mushroom blends, and then biofeedback, equine somatics, and of course, animal communication. All of those therapies, and I'm sure many others that I haven't mentioned or tried, each of them are different, and yet they all have their place. And each of them were an important component for taking the next step on his healing journey. It wasn't one thing or one therapy that has made the biggest difference from him being the pasture pony that the Spanish vets told me he would end up being versus the small tour FEI horse that I purchased him as. And along the way it's been now, as I record this, 3.5 years, I've ridden Piaffe on him again. I've ridden Passage on him again. We've done lines of changes. We've done pirouettes. And it's just a matter of where he feels on a given day. But it's all there and it's all back. And he's been willing to offer it, which has been really cool. And then also, as we go more into the riding side and back into riding, learning about saddle fit nuances. With his condition now of not having the deep digital flexors, I'm learning a lot of unexpected lessons in anatomy. And I'm also learning along the way that not a lot of vets and farriers, at least out in California, have experience with horses that don't have deep digital flexors and don't necessarily know some of the intricacies of, say, trimming a horse or shoeing a horse without this important tendon. And also riding, because as you can imagine, figuring out how to ride and in a way that helps him and supports him without putting weight on the forehand has been a real learning experience. Gomez is barely 15 hands and he's very compact. I'm 5'9", and I'm very, I guess you could say, lengthy or leggy. So there's been some adjustments that I've needed to learn to stay over his center of gravity at all times. But he's a horse that is physically going strong and defying the odds. I'm learning that the physical training problems might not be so physical after all. Last winter, he stopped cantering overnight, left lead. And as it turns out, the reason why he couldn't canter is there was a soul contract there that needed to be released. When immediately after the soul contract was released, the very next day, he could canter again. That's not talked a lot in healing circles or with vets. Since, unfortunately, laminitis is all too common, the only words of advice that I could give someone is just to listen to the horse, both surrender and trust the process, and just keep asking why. And for me, that was the most important thing, was asking why. Why is this happening? Not just in the why is a bad thing happening to me, but okay, why is this horse suddenly having struggles here? When I would use the game ready, sometimes he would act like he's lost circulation and his feet have gone numb. So why is that if what I'm doing is supposedly beneficial for a horse in that situation? And that, more than anything, has taken us on this journey, and just trusting yourself, trusting the horse, and going deeper. Ultimately, I have Gomez today because I ignored the advice of vets that are highly respected, and that I do respect. But between the vet's words and looking at my horse, I chose to look at my horse and see what he was telling me. And that's given us really 3.5 wonderful years together. And if I could go back and give myself advice, go back to May 19, when the pulses and the rotation started, and give myself advice, it would just be to trust the process even when it's scary. I'm so excited, and I really look forward to sharing this podcast with you. I have some amazing guests lined up. And if you'd like to learn more about the healing work Gomez has inspired, you can visit my site, thelab.horse. For more information about me, your host, Meredith Crawford, you can also go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Meredith Crawford Lab. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me on this ride.